Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is Special Conversations. I'm Laura Sims, and I'm really excited to have Karen Weingarten here to talk about her book, Pregnancy Test. This is the last Special Conversations in this building, so just soak it up, because I'm not sure what form we will take after this for a while, but we'll see. So Karen is professor of English at Queens College, City University of New York. Her book, Pregnancy Test, came out in March 2023 and tells the history of the pregnancy test and how it changed what it means to be pregnant. Her first book, Abortion in the American Imagination, Before Life and Choice, 1880 to 1940, presented a genealogy of abortion rhetoric in American literature, film, and popular culture. She co-edited a forum for feminist studies reflecting on 50 years since Roe v. Wade in early 2023, and she has recently published essays in college literature, Journal of Medical Humanities, and American Literary History on late 19th and early 20th century American literature, cultural histories of reproduction, and the history of eugenics. She's a regular contributor to the peer-reviewed history of medicine and gender blog, Nursing Cleo. So she'll be talking about her book, Pregnancy Test, and we'll introduce it first a little bit for us, and then she and I will talk and we'll take questions. So please join me in welcoming Karen Weingarten.
Thank you so much, Laura, for organizing this. And you're going to stand over there to do my slides.
That's right, I'll go around. Thanks for the reminder.
And I'm just going to give you a short 10-minute presentation just to give you a little bit of the history, and then I think Laura will ask me questions. My book, Pregnancy Test, it looks like this, and it's part of Bloomsbury's Object Lesson series. I think have more than 70 books in the series now about different objects and their histories. And they're all really short books. So it's like a nifty little series.
And we do have copies for sale.
Yes.
For $10.
For $10. It's normally $15.
Such a deal.
Yes.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. I'm going to tell you a little bit. You can put it to the first slide. So this is a matula, and I have it up here because for as long, I think, as people were pregnant and were conscious of pregnancy, there has been an interest in finding out if you could test for pregnancy. And there are like Egyptian papyruses from thousands of years ago for various kinds of pregnancy tests. And in the Middle Ages, doctors would put urine in these jugs and supposedly say that depending on the color or the consistency of the urine, they could tell whether or not a woman was pregnant. And they came up with all kinds of sometimes pretty wacky tests to determine whether or not women were pregnant. I'll use put it to the next slide. The first reliable pregnancy test was invented in 1927. In Germany, and it required killing a live animal. The way the test worked is a woman's urine was collected and then injected at first into a mouse and then later into a rabbit, and the person conducting this test would then have to kill the animal, unfortunately slice the animal open, and if the mouse or rabbit's ovaries swelled in response to what we now know is HCG, the hormone HCG, that meant that the woman was pregnant. If there was no swelling, it meant you were not pregnant. And while it might sound kind of horrifying as a test, it was really lauded as a really important breakthrough, right? Because for the first time, there was a reliable way to test for pregnancy, and actually, and this was marketed in the 1930s in the U.S. You started seeing doctors' offices and clinics advertising a laboratory test that used this method, and it really took until the mid-1960s for there to be a laboratory pregnancy test that didn't require using a live animal for every single test. So it was all pretty recent until that was invented. And then it took until 1969, you can put to the next slide, until someone named Meg Crane, who's actually from New Jersey. She was born and raised in New Jersey, and she was living in New York City and working for the company Organon, which you can put it to the next slide, right here in West Orange, New Jersey, so not far from here. She was working as a designer for the pharmaceutical company Organon, but she would regularly walk through Organon's laboratory, and one day she saw a row of test tubes in its laboratory and asked someone what was this going on, and a doctor explained to her that this was a laboratory pregnancy test that Organon was testing women's urine that was being shipped from doctors' offices. She asked some questions and she was like, you know what, this doesn't actually sound that complicated. I think this is something women could do at home and it could be really significant. And so she went home, worked with different materials she had, and eventually, put it to the next slide, she invented the first home pregnancy test, and this is what it eventually looked like. Nothing like the home pregnancy test today, obviously. The way it worked is the cap came off, your urine would go in the cap, you would use this little dropper, thank you, I just played, to put the urine in the test tube. It had chemicals in it. You had to keep it very, very still for 2 hours, and then the results would be reflected at the mirror in the bottom of this device. You can put it to the next slide. This is what the instructions look like, the booklet that it came with, that she drew these drawings. It was a 12-step process, and you could see here at the bottom, if you were pregnant, the result would look like a ring or a donut, right? There would be like a very specific circle. If you were not pregnant, it would just be this like messy blur. And that's how the test worked. Meg, with really Organon, patented it. You can put it to the next slide. This is the patent. You could find it on file still in the US Patent Office. In 1969, they filed it. And eventually, they started trying to market it. But the US, there was a lot of resistance to marketing a home pregnancy test in the US. People thought it would give women too much knowledge. There was concern that it would increase the number of abortions, illegal abortions that people had, right? This was before Roe v. Wade. And so they decided to market the test in Canada first. We'll put the next slide. This is the packaging. So this is what it looked like when it was first sold in Canada. Meg designed the logo for the test as well.
I'm sorry, what year is this?
This would have been 1971,
Okay.
when it was first sold in Canada. And I'm going to actually have you listen to the first radio advertisement for the home pregnancy test. But I'll ask you to stop it after a while.
Okay.
It's in English and French, and we don't need to listen to French.
Hello, I'm Vicki Sanders with a question for married women. Do you remember the last time you thought you might be pregnant? If that happens again, remember it's not only your right to know, it's important. And the sooner the better, so that you can go to your doctor for advice, what drugs to avoid, what diet to follow, what precautions to take. Seeing your doctor early can even help prevent some possible birth defects. To find out whether or not you're pregnant, get Predictor. Predictor is a simple test for the hormone of pregnancy that you do at home, in private, in minutes. You get the results in 2 hours, and Predictor is accurate. Predictor has been tested in homes, tested in laboratories, and tested clinically. Get Predictor and be the first to know.
Good stuff. Thank you. So so that was the first home pregnancy test commercial, or radio commercial. It aired in Montreal. It aired in other cities, I think, eventually as well. And there was another version in French that followed that one. It took until 1978 for the home pregnancy test to be sold in the U.S. because there was so much resistance to having a home pregnancy test. The FDA resisted it. Pharmaceutical companies resisted selling it. but it eventually was marketed in 1978 under the name EPT, which I think still sells home pregnancy tests today. And you could see it actually used the exact same design as Meg's test, even almost 8 years later, after she invented it. You could see it at the bottom, you could see the test results were read in the exact same way. You could put it to the next slide. There was a lot of resistance, even in 1978. This is an ad in Ladies' Home Journal from 1978. If you think you might be pregnant, here's why you should leave pregnancy testing in the hands of professionals. And you see a lot of these ads in women's journals. And in fact, even though the home pregnancy test was being sold in drugstores, it was not very popular. Most people through the 70s into the early 80s were still going to their doctors to get a pregnancy diagnosis. And you can put it to the...
I just wanted to point out, I remember in your book you talk about how they purposely put the woman in the,
yes,
a woman in the lab coat to show it's not sexist,
yes,
right?
Yes, the woman technician in the lab coat, right, doing the home pregnancy test for you. So it's not a man doing the test for you. Yeah, so it really took until the ELISA test was invented for home pregnancy testing to take off. And if that word, ELISA, sounds familiar to you, it's because a lot of home testing now uses the ELISA, right? The COVID testing that we all became so familiar with in the last few years, that was an ELISA test. The ELISA, the science behind the ELISA wasn't invented for home pregnancy testing. It was actually, I believe, first invented as a test for insulin for people with diabetes, but a lot of home pregnancy testing, from strep throat to the flu to COVID, of course, now uses ELISA testing, as does home pregnancy test. And you can put it to the next slide. And it took until 1987 and 1988 for the now familiar wand pregnancy test to be invented. So this home pregnancy test now that I'm assuming is really familiar to all of you, right? It's how most people in the US and the world really find out that they're pregnant, is a relatively recent invention. It really took it was not until 1988 that it was invented.
Well, I used one in 1981.
What'd you say?
I used a home pregnancy test in 1981.
A home
Pregnancy test?
Yeah.
That one? The wand?
Yeah.
What year was it that you used it?
81.
1981.
So in 1981, I don't think you definitely would not have used the wand pregnancy test. There were earlier versions, so like this Murphy Brown episode from 1991, it really popularized the home pregnancy test, the whole episode. There was,
She doesn't look happy.
yes, well, it was shocking to her. And she's using an earlier version of the ELISA pregnancy test. You actually dipped it in a cup of urine, and then if the tip turned blue, it meant that you were pregnant. And this kind of ELISA pregnancy test was invented, I believe, in the mid-'80s. But there were different versions of home pregnancy tests between the one that Meg invented and the wand pregnancy test that was invented in '87. Today, yeah, there's like a million. This is my local drugstore in Queens. I live in Queens. But I'm sure that in any drugstore you go to today, there's many different kinds of home pregnancy tests. They now advertise 6 days sooner or more accurate, right? There's all kinds of marketing ploys that they use to compete, but it's become a pretty expected thing that you could go to the drugstore and pick up a home pregnancy test. And you can put the next slide now. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about the future of home pregnancy tests because I don't think we've stopped here. This company, Leah, they tried to market a home pregnancy test that you could flush down the toilet because the whole test is disposable. And that way, if you are living with someone and you don't want that person to know whether or not you're pregnant, you could just flush your test down the toilet and they can't find it in the trash can. And this could be especially important in states or countries where abortion is illegal, or you're with a partner who wouldn't want you to have an abortion. Unfortunately, Leah was not, they were on the market briefly, but then they could not find a manufacturer to produce this paper at an affordable cost. And so they weren't able to market in any kind of wide-scale way. And then you could put it to my last slide.
And sorry, what was it made of?
It's just made out of like a biodegradable paper that like disintegrates in water. And so then you could flush it down the toilet. Yeah. And the most recent home pregnancy test will actually tell you how many weeks you're pregnant by testing your level of HCG. And this is now, you can get it in the UK, you can get it in Canada. I haven't seen it in the US yet. I've heard some concern that that a pregnancy test that could tell you how many weeks pregnant you are could be used against you, right? Let's say you take a home pregnancy test and it tells you that you're more than 6 weeks pregnant and you live in a state that bans abortion after 6 weeks. If someone found evidence that you took a home pregnancy test that says you were more than 6 weeks pregnant and you went and still tried to have an abortion, that could be evidence that you intentionally tried to have an illegal abortion. And I'm not sure whether that's the reason we haven't seen it yet in the US, but it hasn't yet arrived. But you know, the home pregnancy test continues to evolve, and I'm now happy to take any questions. That kind of gives you a brief overview of some of the things I discuss in my book. There's lots of questions.
Yeah, well, that was a funny story, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
I would think that the doctors would be, I mean, the money you would get by a woman coming in to get her pregnancy test. When we were doing this, I think people would get the pregnancy test and then go, I want to confirm this with my doctor.
Yeah.
But I would think they would not, you know, be so happy about that.
About the home pregnancy
Yeah.
test. Yeah, and in fact, when Meg first approached the vice president of Organon with her idea, the first thing he was like, no, absolutely not, because laboratory pregnancy test was big business for them. And they were like, why would we undermine that? They were making a lot of money through laboratory pregnancy tests. And so that was definitely a reason why they didn't want to offer a home pregnancy
Is
test.
she still alive?
Meg, yeah, I interviewed her for the book, so if you read my first chapter, I talk about meeting her. She lives in Midtown Manhattan, and I have met her several times now. I interviewed her in person and on the phone. She's in her mid-80s now. She's lovely.
And you can tell everyone how she became very wealthy from
Right,
designing
yes.
the first home pregnancy test.
She did not earn a single cent.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. The patent that she put out, so you can't patent something in a company's name or a corporation's name. So the patent was under her name, and Organon supposedly paid her $1 for the patent, although she never even got the $1.
Oh,
She didn't even get the $1. And I mean, she worked as a temp for Organon, right? And then as the contractor for Organon. And so she made money, like, you know, an hourly wage, but she did not make any money. I will say though, she feels some regret, but it's also how she met her partner of 40 years, because he was the advertising executive that Organon brought in to market the home pregnancy test, and they hit it off.
And he kind of was the one who recognized, like,
Yes.
this is the best
That's
design,
right, yes.
right?
So Organon was not going to go with her design, and he really pushed them to go with her design. I talk about this in detail in the book, like why he decided to choose her design. It was really like the most practical design. It really thought about the woman who would be taking the test, whereas all the other designers were men. And like they didn't think about like where would the urine be collected. They were more concerned with making the home pregnancy test look pretty. They were pink, they were frilly. And you could see Meg's was very kind of practical and no nonsense. So she and Ira were together for 40 years, and she calls him the love of her life, and it's like a really romantic story. And so I think it's really lovely that the home pregnancy test also has this romance behind it.
They had kids?
They didn't have kids. So Ira Ira was married before Meg, and he had 2 daughters with his first wife, who's a fairly well-known artist, actually. So, so Meg and Ira were really involved in New York City's like art scene. So the artist Jasper Jones, who many of you know, Meg and Ira were good friends with him. She showed him her design of the home pregnancy test, and she said he was not impressed with it. Yeah, that anecdote did not make it in the book. Yeah, but it's just like the kinds of stories you hear when you talk to people.
Wow.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about why the US lagged so far behind Canada in accepting the home pregnancy test?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of reasons. One thing that was different between the US and Canada, and actually Europe as well, was, but I'll just talk about Canada, was in Canada throughout the 60s and 70s, after a fairly straightforward laboratory test was invented, a woman could go to her local pharmacy and ask for a pregnancy test. And this was really important because it meant that, let's say you lived in South Orange and you knew your local pharmacist, you could maybe drive like 2 towns over and get a pregnancy test at that pharmacy. The US did not allow pharmacists to conduct pregnancy testing. And all pregnancy testing in the US had to be done through a doctor's office. And so it gave doctors a lot of control over pregnancy testing. And I think the medical profession didn't want to give up that control. The laboratories that were conducting these tests didn't want to give up the money that they were making from them. And Canada liberalized its abortion laws before the US. In 1969, Canada liberalized a lot of their abortion laws, which happened to be the year that Meg invented the home pregnancy test. Whereas in the US, as you probably know, the Roe v. Wade was not passed until 1973. And so I think a lot of pharmaceutical companies and like the heads of pharmaceutical companies worried about the liability of inventing a test that would make it very easy, a lot easier for women to access abortion without really ever going through like a medical office or a medical profession. And I think all of these things contributed to why it took so long for the home pregnancy test to reach the US.
What did they cost? How much did they cost?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when the Meg's test cost $10, which doesn't seem like that much, except $10 in then was about $40 today. So it was not, it was, and I actually talk about the cost quite a bit in the book. So $40 is actually a lot of money when you think about it, and especially Meg's test, it was a really, really sensitive test. And by sensitive, I don't mean like it detected low amounts of HCG, the hormone. By sensitive, I mean it could get messed up really easily. So like if you jostled it, or if you even like jostled the table underneath it a little bit, the whole test would be, like it wouldn't work. And so you could spend like what is to us would feel like $40 and not get any kind of definitive result. And so that might be another reason why it wasn't so popular for many, many years, because it was expensive and it wasn't as reliable as today's home pregnancy
Where were
test.
they sold? Only in pharmacies?
The home pregnancy test? Mostly in pharmacies, yeah. I mean, like today, right? I mean,
So
today,
pharmacies had to be agreed
to stock them,
to
yes,
stock them?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And in fact, in Canada, there are like, when the home pregnancy test was first brought to Canada, there are news articles about some pharmacists who are like, I'm not selling it in my pharmacy. Like, if someone wants to get a pregnancy test, we'll conduct it, but we're not selling the home pregnancy test in my pharmacy.
Do you happen to know whether, I'm sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
insurance covers these things? Since I haven't gotten one,
No,
Do you?
I don't
Over
think
the
it should.
counter.
they're always out of pocket?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to your doctor's office and get one. You could go to Planned Parenthood and get one. You can go to like a pregnancy center and get one, right? And that's actually how a lot of young women, and sometimes lots of young women, are lured into these like anti-abortion pregnancy test centers, is because they offer free pregnancy testing. Because as far as I know, health insurance never covers home pregnancy tests. Yeah.
Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, so who got the $40? It wasn't Meg, was it Organon that profited, and what happened to that company?
Yeah, so actually, Organon eventually decided not to go into the home pregnancy test business, and so they ended up selling Meg's design to other pharmaceutical companies. So I'm sure that Organon profited off of it because they sold the concept to these other pharmaceutical companies. But yeah, I mean, I think it's ultimately the pharmaceutical companies who were manufacturing and selling the tests to local drugstores that were making the money. Yeah. But yeah, Meg never got like a percentage or even some kind of flat fee besides the salary or the temp work she did.
I guess since she was an employee of Organon and she made it while working there,
Yes.
it belonged to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's how they probably
Yeah.
started. Yeah.
So how did you become interested in reproductive health issues? You're an English professor,
It's
right?
true. Yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah.
how did you become interested in it? How did you, like, what drew you to this book?
To the
Like, how
book,
did you-
yeah.
Yeah.
So my first book is about like the cultural history of abortion, and in that book, I look at how abortion has been represented mostly in late 19th, early 20th century novels and short stories, some films. There were actually early 20th century films about abortion and popular culture. And so I do talk about literature actually quite a bit because abortion, people always ask me, what? There are novels about abortion in the early 20th century, and actually there are a lot of novels that have representations of abortion in the 1920s and the 1930s. And abortion was very much like a conversation that people talked about. It was illegal, obviously,
Yeah.
but it didn't mean that people didn't have abortions.
Right.
They had lots of abortions. And so I was interested in how novels and other kinds of texts were circulating ideas about abortion, how they were resisting kind of the popular conceptions about abortion and sometimes also upholding those conceptions. Like you said in my intro, I write for this, I haven't written for them in a while, but I used to write a lot for Nursing Clio, and I wrote a short piece for them about the pregnancy test because my sister, who's actually here, took a pregnancy test. Normally when I talk about it, she's not here.
Here she is.
And one of the things that I became, when I started doing some research about the home pregnancy test, is it's actually not as reliable as the packaging of home pregnancy tests tell you, right? For example, if you have a chemical pregnancy, which I don't know if people know what a chemical pregnancy is, it's a pregnancy where a blastocyst forms, right? Like the sperm fertilizes the egg, it implants briefly in the uterus, and so HCG is produced for a few days, but then it's not a viable pregnancy, right? There's too many genetic abnormalities, and your body miscarries it. If you were not taking a home pregnancy test, you probably wouldn't even know you were pregnant because it happens so early in pregnancy that you would just experience the bleeding as like a normal, period. But if you took a home pregnancy test, in like that window, you might discover that you were very briefly pregnant. And a lot of people who take a home pregnancy test in that period because they want to be pregnant experience a sense of loss that in an earlier generation people might not have experienced in the same kind of way because they wouldn't have even known they were pregnancy. And so it raised interesting questions for me, like, what is pregnancy actually? What does the pregnancy test actually test for? And then I also, in the second half of this book, I also look at cultural representations of the pregnancy test, right? In novels, on TV especially, in advertising, and I'm really interested in how the pregnancy test and the home pregnancy test especially has actually changed how we think about pregnancy and even how pregnancy is defined because it's so sensitive and because it is able to test for pregnancy earlier than we ever might have imagined.
I mean, I don't know how recent this is, but to me it's kind of recent that some of the commercials show people happy that they're not pregnant.
Yes.
Which, yeah, because it's like, they show like a college girl in her dorm and like, hello, we can all relate to that when you were.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that's an improvement. On just
Yeah.
always showing somebody who's excited about being pregnant, that sometimes, no, this is, the pregnancy test is used for that too, to find out.
And
no,
that's very,
I'm
very,
not pregnant.
yeah, that's very recent because
Yeah.
like when the first home pregnancy test commercials, all of them were married couples.
Right.
Yeah,
And
said married.
Yeah,
Yes.
right, and it was a big emphasis, and some of the commercials from the late 80s and 90s don't even show women, it's all husbands. It's hilarious. You can see these commercials on YouTube,
Oh.
these old commercials, and some of them are about like recording husbands' reactions to learning that their wife was pregnant. One is like a husband learns on a payphone, and because some of the early home pregnancy tests took like half an hour or 15 minutes to get the results, there's a lot of tests about the anxiety around waiting to get your home pregnancy test
I love
result.
the description of the David Lynch commercial.
Yes.
David Lynch did a pregnancy test commercial
Yes,
in the
of Twin
90s,
Peaks,
or-
yeah.
Yeah, of Twin Peaks fame.
Yeah, I think
And
it was in '97 that he did.
I just love that.
And he was really the first, so he apparently directed a bunch of commercials, and he was really interested in directing this home pregnancy test commercial. And his was really the first commercial for home pregnancy test. The actress in it, she's not happy that, it's ambiguous,
We
right?
don't know if she's
Pregnant or not, right.
Yeah,
The
but
test, she's happy, but you don't know
You don't know
whether
why.
she's happy because she's pregnant or because she's not pregnant. And so there's like, it was the first time that it was ambiguous.
But, you know, I didn't realize until I saw the commercial that this hadn't been represented before.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was like, wow, this is a good thing. This is
yeah.
safe.
I mean, ultimately pharmaceutical companies discovered, well, there's this untapped market of single women who, don't want to be pregnant and might want our pregnancy test. And so we really should start advertising to them as well, because they could probably buy a lot of home pregnancy tests. Yeah.
You know, thinking about the aesthetic temporally, like through time, it really strikes me like the initial, even though Jasper Johns didn't like it, like it seems like the work of modern art. Like I could see it in a moment. And then the cover on your book and what it is now, it's so of the iPhone age. It's so, it's like 23andMe simplicity, you know? And then I'm really struck with the future that they couldn't have an affordable model right now. But thinking associatively of like Elizabeth Holmes being a good example of a bad example.
Yeah.
But this idea that you can do everything, and now like more and more on the iPhone you can test. And I wonder about a medical technology, like, it always has to be chemical, but I wonder about something coming to your app or something.
Yeah, I
You
mean.
can also have privacy issues attached
Right.
to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, like one of the things when Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health was passed in 2022, one of the things that women's health organizations were telling women is to delete menstrual cycle apps from your phone.
Wow.
And I know that doesn't exactly answer
No,
your
that's
question,
interesting.
but, because that could then, for the same reasons, like if you wanted to get an illegal abortion, and you went and got one and someone, reported you, which in Texas people are encouraged to do,
Rewarded for it, right?
and rewarded for it, and then you had this app on your phone that was tracking your menstrual cycle and maybe even saved on a cloud outside your phone, that could be used as evidence against you that you did have an abortion. And so I'm really wary of apps that there are apps for blind people who want to take a home pregnancy test, because who have visual impairment or are blind, who can't see the second line. And so the app, I think, can read your home pregnancy test for you and then speak whether you're pregnant or not. But they're actually trying to develop technologies that go in the other direction, where you're not reliant on an app, where you could just do it by touch, so that you're not reliant on this like third-party app or person. So if anything, maybe we're moving in the opposite direction. Yeah. But yeah, you always need to test for HCG. That's one thing that all reliable pregnancy tests share throughout the ages, is they're always testing for their hormone HCG, and that has not changed since 1927.
I mean, it seems to me that pregnancy tests could become, part of litigation, part of, I don't know, has there, in your research, have they been used with any court situations or? So
the only thing that I've come across, and it's nothing recent, but there have been lawsuits around home pregnancy tests or pregnancy tests. So there was a police department in Northern California that would give, every time they arrested a woman, they would give her a pregnancy test without her knowledge. Yes, there was, I can't remember, in the Army, there was a division that was giving all its women soldiers a pregnancy test once a month without their knowledge as well. And then when some women found out about it, they sued. In the 1960s, once the laboratory pregnancy test, like the easier laboratory pregnancy test was invented, there was a phone company that would test women, when they were interviewing women, they would tell the women that they wanted a sample of their urine for drug testing before they hired them, but they would test them for pregnancy because they didn't want to hire anyone who was pregnant. Right, because they didn't want to pay. They want them to they don't want to train them, and then they would leave, right, to be mothers. So there are all kinds of cases where pregnancy tests have been used without women's permission or consent. But I haven't heard of any recent, but given this long history, and then there are science fictional novels where there's a great novel by Lenny Zumas called Red Clocks, where abortion is illegal across the US, and so women try to go to Canada to get abortions, and the US government catches on, and so anyone who looks like she's an age where she might be fertile, in this novel, right, it's fictional, they make the woman take a pregnancy test before she can cross the border. And that's science fiction, but
you can imagine it happening for sure.
Yeah, and so it is a technology that has the potential, and that's what I talk about in the book. It's both a very liberatory technology in many ways, but unfortunately it has the potential to be used in coercive ways as well.
So some of the abortion rights organizations are actually putting up billboards from where states it's illegal to have an abortion, giving them encouragement and only 20 miles until you reach Illinois and all that stuff. So it's really interesting how we're going backwards.
Right, we're definitely going backwards. Yeah, and one of the other arguments I make in my book is that now more than ever, I just criticize the home pregnancy test, but it is actually a really critical technology. Because you can't get an abortion without knowing you're first pregnant, right? And so it is a very, very critical technology, and it's been I argue in the book that it's been an overlooked reproductive technology. There are a lot of books about the birth control pill, about abortion, about IVF, and these are all really revolutionary technologies, but the home pregnancy test and pregnancy test in general has really been a fundamental reproductive technology. It really changed how we think about pregnancy, and being able to know you're pregnant early on really does open up more possibilities for you. And so I don't want to undermine it either. It has been really
And knowing
important.
without leaving your house.
That's right, yeah.
Buying it at the pharmacy or whatever,
But today you could buy it on Amazon.
Oh, that's true.
You could buy it at a dollar store.
You're right, you buy it at the
Oh,
dollar
yeah.
store.
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Tell your story
Yeah.
Then
about,
I was standing online and it was just the dollar store at Springfield Avenue, and like mixed in with the impulse items like gum and candy.
Yeah.
I'm just looking around, I'm like, what, pregnancy test?
Yes.
for $1?
For
Do you
$1.
wanna take
$1.25 now, but.
Yeah.
$1.25?
And
Yeah.
you know what, in one way it felt disrespectful to me.
Huh, because it was just like this throwaway
Yeah.
item, yeah.
Yeah, it really did, it bothered me.
Yeah.
And I thought, how accurate is it, but
Yeah,
I-
what the quality.
I think they are accurate, yeah, I mean, because the pregnancy tests that are like in a wand, plastic wand, if you break them open, it's just a little strip inside.
Oh, and that's what the dollar.
And the dollar store is selling the strip without the packaging, which I
gosh.
think is what makes it more expensive, right? It's all this,
The look.
the packaging. But like on Amazon, you could buy those strips, like you could buy like 20 of them in a bundle for less than $20. And they're a little harder to use. Usually you have to pee in a cup and then dip it in,
Okay.
because it's just harder to pee on this like tiny little strip. But they're just as accurate as the ones that you could buy.
Paying for packaging.
I think you're mostly paying for packaging.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I know you already talked about the live animal testing
Yeah.
a little, but could you just please talk about the toads?
Okay, the
Because I love
toads, yeah.
toads.
Yeah. So what Laura's referring to, and I kind of skipped this over in my presentation, there was a pregnancy test between the laboratory pregnancy test and the mouse and rabbit test that involved the South African toad. It was discovered that there was a toad in South Africa, it was actually an aquatic toad, so it had to be in an aquarium, that the toad releases its eggs, right? And the South African toad, the female, will only release its eggs in the presence of a male toad. So if you take away the male toad, it won't release its egg. But if you inject it with urine from a pregnant woman, it would release its eggs. And so it became a kind of
Jeez.
pregnancy test where you didn't have to kill the animal.
But you didn't have to, it wouldn't die.
It wouldn't die,
Because
because,
the first
yes,
non-lethal
that's right, that's a good way of putting it.
pregnancy test.
And you couldn't do it at home. It was messy. You had to have these aquariums with toads. You had to let them rest for a month between.
But they did get a month's rest.
Yes, I
Okay.
believe you had to like rest
That's
them
good.
between to make it more accurate.
I
But you didn't have to kill them, which
Yeah.
was a huge improvement over the mouse and the toad test. And this actually became really popular, especially in LA. I saw so many ads in Los Angeles newspapers advertising the toad test. And there was like these clinics would open, these companies would open where they would offer doctors, like you could send your patient's urine. And part of me wonders whether it was so popular in LA and particularly like in areas around like Hollywood studios because it was advertised, like it was particularly for young actresses or aspiring actresses who were
Right.
coming and maybe having affairs and getting pregnant and then feeling pretty desperate to have an abortion after that. And that was,
What?
Young actresses who wanted to get the job and
right,
Yes.
yeah.
coerced into.
Yes, yeah,
This is pre,
right, and this was
too.
in the toad pregnancy test was really, it was invented in like the late 40s. And it really became popular in the 40s and the 50s.
Well, that makes you give actresses. I just realized that in most movies in the 40s and 50s, they never said somebody was pregnant. Remember, they
Yes.
would say the rabbit died.
That's right,
Oh,
yes.
really?
Yes.
The rabbit died.
Yes, that
Right?
is the most that's the
And it
most
was like,
common
but you
euphemism.
knew,
Yes.
oh, because they're not gonna say she's pregnant, I guess that
But
was
the
not.
rabbit died either way, right?
That's right, so.
Yeah, that's why.
I don't know, like, those of you who, does anybody here remember,
But they used to say that, right?
yes, does anybody remember the TV show Maude from the 70s?
Yes,
It was a
yes.
feminist TV show from the 70s, and Maude learns she's pregnant in her 40s, and she has an abortion. It was a really controversial thing, and when she announces to the audience that she's pregnant, she says, "The rabbit died!" And And yes, the rabbit died regardless of whether or not you were pregnant, but it did become a euphemism
Yeah.
for saying you were pregnant. And that became, you saw it a lot in TV
Yeah,
and
yeah.
films as a way to announce pregnancy. Yeah.
Wow.
That was B. Arthur, right?
Yeah.
Was it
That's
beyond?
right, yes, it was,
Okay,
yes.
one of the Golden Girls.
Yeah, that's right.
Golden Girls,
Yes,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah. And her husband has a vasectomy, which was also really controversial.
Wow.
Oh.
Yes.
Now there's birth control.
Yes, best birth control ever.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I was wondering, this is backtracking again a bit, but what were some of the novels that you wrote about in your first book that had to do with abortion? I was
Oh,
just
about,
curious.
okay, yeah.
From late 19th century, early 20th,
Yeah.
right?
So the first novel that is like very explicit, the first literary novel that's very explicit about abortion is Edith Wharton's Summer. I don't know if people have read it. Wonderful novel, you should read it. It's published in 1918.
Yeah.
And the protagonist of that novel is a young woman named Charity. It takes place in New England, the novel takes place in New England, and she has this love affair with a man from the city, from New York City. It's this passionate love affair. People might have read Ethan Frome, right, by Edith Wharton. Wharton used to call Summer her hot Ethan, because whereas Ethan Frome is frigid, it takes place in the winter.
That's right.
All the characters are really frigid. Summer is very hot. And it takes place in the summer.
Yeah.
And there is, as much as there can be in the early 20th century, a very sexy love affair. And they have sex. And Charity gets pregnant. And she learns that there's an abortionist in the big town next to her, and she visits the abortionist clinic. She doesn't have an abortion,
Okay.
but another character like has an abortion before the actions of the novel.
Okay.
William Faulkner has 2 novels that have abortions, As I Lay Dying,
Okay.
and If I Forget Thee, Jerusalem. As I Lay Dying, the daughter is pregnant, and the novel is about they're trying to bury the mom, and they're like moving across the south. Also in the summer, it's very hot. The mom's corpse is rotting, smells bad, and the daughter is her boyfriend gave her money to procure abortion pills, and she goes from like pharmacy to pharmacy asking for abortion pills and is not able to get them. And then at the end of the novel, her dad steals her abortion money. An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser.
Okay, I remember that.
Yeah, also abortion doesn't happen, but the boyfriend tries to get her an abortion and ends up killing her, or it's controversial, it's ambiguous whether he kills her
Oh,
or
I
not.
see. Okay.
But he tries to get her to have an abortion before he drowns her in a lake. And then it was made into a movie as well, yeah. with
That's
Elizabeth
right.
Taylor. So those are just some, like,
Yeah.
there are
Some famous
others,
ones,
some famous ones from the early 20th century
Right.
that talk about abortion in one way or another.
Bills for like white elephants, anyway.
Yeah, that's a short
Oh,
story by
yes.
Hemingway,
That's right.
has an abortion, yeah.
But doesn't really talk about
They don't talk about it, they talk
directly.
around it.
Right, they talk around it,
Yeah.
yeah, they talk
Yeah.
around it, but it's very, the whole story is about abortion.
Yeah.
Langston Hughes has a short story, really not well known, called Cora Unashamed. Eugene O'Neill has a play called Abortion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from 1914, never produced in his lifetime.
Not
But
surprising.
it's about abortion, as the
Yeah.
title of the play suggests. So there's actually more than you might think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
are you still doing research in this area?
About abortion, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually am working on a book right now for Penguin Classics called The Penguin Handbook of Abortion in American Literature. So hopefully it will be published next November in time for the election.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's exciting.
And so-
Please make sure all of your information
Yeah.
is hidden
I
online.
know, I mean, that's the
because it's
scary
recording.
thing.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's awesome though.
But so, yeah, I'm still writing about abortion.
Yeah,
Um,
and is that literary excerpts from?
That's right, yeah.
Introduce it?
So it's a collection, yeah, I have an introduction, and then I actually will include a head note for each selection, just to
Okay.
contextualize it a little bit in the history, and I kind of take you through, I actually starts really early on. I start with a naturalist who came to South America and documented how indigenous women were using abortifacients to give themselves abortions because they were being enslaved, and they didn't want to have children who were born into slavery. And then I also include oral histories from enslaved women in the US who talk about the different abortifacients they used during slavery, also as a way of resistance. And then I go through like a few examples in the 19th century, and the book only goes until I think 1972. So I only take you to Roe v. Wade with a poem by Lucille Clifton called The Lost Baby Poem. Yeah.
That's great. Well, you'll have to have a part 2,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You'll have to have a part 2 that's
Yeah. I mean, the problem with
post Roe v. Wade.
the problem with the part 2 is permissions are very expensive to get on
Oh,
contemporary
right.
books.
Of course.
But yeah,
Of course.
but yeah.
Well, any last questions? Yes, Carla?
Yeah, mine is more regarding the Bloomsbury series.
Yeah.
One question is, how opinionated or how objective do you have to be about a subject? And how did you, I've never heard of these, how did you discover them, or did you know about the series?
Yeah. How did I discover them? Well, I'm an academic, so I go to conferences and I saw the books in conferences. They tend to like, Bloomsbury tends to display them in conferences.
They're so beautiful.
Yeah, and they put a lot, I don't know if you're in publishing, they put flaps, which is like a special thing.
Love the princess one.
Yeah, and so they have been putting a lot of effort into making them look nice and well designed, consistently designed, they all look this way. And I was like, they should have a book about the pregnancy test. And so I pitched to them, and they accepted my pitch.
But how, I mean, in terms of presenting a subject, you were talking, I have to see how you present it in the book, but it doesn't seem like how objective can you be?
They're not really looking for objectivity.
They
A lot of
really-
these books are, some of them, actually mine is probably more historical. And some of them are very much like told from the first person. There's one called Doctor, I don't think it's here, and it's told about a doctor, about his experiences.
Okay.
The one about the high heels, she talks a lot about her own experiences wearing high heels. So they're not like objective, they're not like these dry.
Objects, but
Yeah.
they're
Right.
focused on objects.
Yes.
I see.
But
But yeah, they're not these like dry histories at all, and they give you a lot of leeway in how, they have to accept your proposal, but they knew what I was gonna do before I did it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and if you want to get her book,
It's
$10. This is like such
It's a
great-
sale.
It's wonderful, so see
More or less
Karen
less
if
Yes,
you're
yeah.
interested.
Less than
And, yes, so I don't know what's gonna happen with
Sure.
special
Yeah.
conversations in 2024, but if you're on my email
You always
list,
come up with.
I will let you know.
Yeah.
Yes, so I have
Yeah.
speakers, we don't have a location.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and it's an honor to do your last event in this space.
Yay.
Any,
Yeah.
any questions?